This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today.
Hello and welcome to BSW episode 401. I am Mandy Logan, getting to sit in while Matt Alderman is enjoying beautiful Italy and his daughter's wedding. And I am thrilled to be here because this week we get to speak with Jeff Pollard of Forrester, and we get to talk about volatility and a lot of really good recommendations that he and his team have put together in a report. So also joining me today is Summer Craze Fowler. Welcome, Summer. How are you?
I am great, and even though I'm just north of Pittsburgh and we were talking about the weather, it feels like it's 99 degrees. You know, I'm still enjoying all of the videos of the Florida Panthers celebrating with the Stanley Cup. Back-to-back trips. We're a big ice hockey family, and no matter who wins, it's exciting for us to watch all of the videos and, you know, how the Stanley Cup's going to travel around the country and world and get into some shenanigans, so...
That is fascinating. I didn't get to watch any of that coverage, and I do have family. They're very, very into hockey and into all of that. And even though I never have been, I adore the ardent fervor that comes from people who are really into it. So I'm glad you and your family are happy. And what about you, Jason? Are you staying cool? Are you hot? Did you watch Ice to cope? What have you been doing?
It is getting warm in Rhode Island. The ACs are definitely getting their business done up here. It's going to be a hot week, so I'm enjoying the cool inside, but I couldn't agree more. Summer, Florida Panthers took it all. Absolutely love it. Brad Marchand is an old Bruin, so I mean he made the switch this year. So I had to. So just so you know, Mandy, we do sports talk kicking into BSW every week. So.
Okay.
and last night, OKC Thunder took the NBA Finals. So
yeah.
Oh, and I feel like on sports, I was completely out of it this past weekend especially. I've been doing more like camping and outdoor self-sportsing, I guess you could say, nice. Not watching any of that.
My style too. I like that too.
I did recently decide that I actually am interested in the women's collegiate basketball. Like that has become more and more intriguing, kind of returning to roots. It's been a long time, I guess, since I followed it, but I more recently have gotten back into that. So eventually I'll have tidbits to share.
Awesome.
We'll get into Jeff's sport of choice.
Yeah, Jeff, what is your sport besides helping CISOs deal with life?
Yeah, I'd say I'm sort of traditionalist, right? I'm from the South, and so for us, it's baseball, football. So,
nice.
Big baseball weekend, men's college World Series and all that stuff. So enjoyed that. Not as much on the hockey side or NBA, but yeah, pretty much baseball and football. Yeah. And it's been hot. So yeah, same deal here.
We run the gamut, Jeff. So during NFL season, we talk NFL, we talk MLB. Yep. So yeah, we run it. All the sports.
Yep.
Okay, so I don't have a sports-related segue, but I do want to talk about this report. Okay.
Well, sports are pretty volatile, right?
They're extremely volatile.
We can jump right into that. You never know what's going to happen, right?
Well, you can talk about the WNBA with that. There was some excitement in there.
There has been some excitement. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, budgets, a huge thing in sports and also in CISO world. And we've got to deal with volatility and things that compromise our ability to go forward. And so in discussing this report, it is titled Security Leaders, How to Thrive Through Volatility. And before we launch, I'm going to actually read something from the summary because I feel like for our audience, they really need to dig into the rapidity and the actionable items that you and your team were trying to bring up instantaneously. So it says, as U.S. federal funding cuts, tariffs, and rising geopolitical instability negatively affect economic sentiment, CISOs face a different risk landscape from even 6 months ago. Please open with something on this.
Yeah, well, so I think the challenge here, right, is that often when we think about volatility and we think about the impact of that on security programs, we sort of look at volatility and we often make that synonymous with a downturn. And I think one of the things that we wanted to focus on within this research is that this does not guarantee a downturn is going to happen. It doesn't guarantee that a downturn is destined for everyone. And the way that you have to manage your security program as a result of that requires a lot more adaptability than maybe organizations are used to because of the nature of unpredictability. You've got to sort of look at it. If things are going to be good, you know what to do. If things are going to be bad, you know what to do. If things are like they are right now, you don't know what the heck to do. And that's really kind of the through line in terms of this research. And I think that's part of that risk profile from a security perspective. We know that the inputs to security are as challenging as they ever were. The constraints are maybe more challenging than they've ever been. But also for every company, it doesn't mean things are only going to be bad. For every division of your company, it doesn't mean that things are going to be bad. And so you've got to find a way to navigate that ultimately.
So Jeff, a lot of times on this show, we'll talk about how important relationships throughout the organization are for the CISO. Building very strong relationships with peers, with other executives. In a situation like this, I think it's even more important, especially being aligned with your CFO, for example, who's also going to be feeling the ebbs and the flows of the volatility in the economy. So talk a little bit about how important relationships are and strategizing with peers and colleagues.
Yeah, I think they're super important. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't remember who said it when I read it the first time, is that politics are just relationships at a macro level. And I think that's really, really important for CISOs to understand. We often use politics as a dirty word or a bad word, but it's not. It's a word that matters. And the way that I look at this from whether it's the CFO perspective or anything else is that as a senior leader, as a CISO, you should be buddying up to someone involved in FP&A. You should be understanding what that discipline is, how it works, whether they're dedicated to technology, whether they're out of the CFO's office, anyone that you can bring in with that expertise, with that experience, because you're right. One of the things that we saw even a couple of years ago is that for most companies, there's this myth out there that security is a cost center. And one of my big challenges over the past few years is trying to dispel that notion, because I don't think security is a cost center. I actually think security generates revenue for businesses, because when you look at some of the primary reasons why security does what it does, it's because customers and suppliers are sending us those third-party risk management questionnaires asking what you're doing in your security program. And those are things that either directly touch revenue or indirectly touch revenue. So I think that's where those relationships are important, because as a CISO, should you be preparing to fight a budget battle on your own? Of course, but isn't it better if you can walk in there with your chief revenue officer and say, hey, we're facing some budget cuts. Here's the thing, about 20% of our customers responsible for 80% of our revenue actually ask us about these controls that finance wants me to cut. And I could go argue that, but it's actually you, chief revenue officer, that's going to face the brunt of this, because your churn rate's going to go up. And I don't think you want that. So why don't we be friends and you help? And by the way, this isn't coming out of your budget. This is still my budget. And one of the other things we've seen is because of those demands, this puts security in a position to foster some of their own relationships, because when IT was facing budget cuts, or if IT does face it, security might be able to go and say, hey, we've got these externalities that are forcing us to make our budget decisions. IT may not have all those same externalities. So maybe we could absorb some of that budget for you and do a little bit of trading of budget from here to there. Like, hey, we'll take that over if maybe next go around you help us out a little bit. So I think that's where those relationships are really important. One, because you want to plug into the rest of the business and be able to understand what your peers and colleagues' actual goals are. And two, you want to be able to swap out when necessary, especially with partners like technology, because not every CISO is still in the technology org. Often they've become a peer of the CIO in some orgs. And as a result, the budget process is quite a bit different now, because it's your budget versus being part of a technology budget. And that's where those relationships really matter. Before, when you were under IT, you were just kind of hoping, right, for that budget allocation. But now if you're a peer, you've got to have better relationships, because you're no longer a carve out of that. You're now directly in the same level. You're getting a different version of the spreadsheet.
Yeah, Jeff, I really like how you couched things. You said when you're looking at your budget, you really want to represent these three constituencies. And where I feel that a lot of times a CISO goes into a room, they talk about the threat environment. But I think what you're implying here is you say, don't even talk about it that way. Talk about it as what's required by the regulator, required by customers, and required by cyber insurers, rather than that whole threat environment and that area. You're really talking about who is requiring this work. How have you seen that done really effectively and communicated for a budget ask?
I think one of the best ways to communicate this is, first and foremost, don't try to do it for every single customer. That's too much of an uplift for the vast majority of security leaders out there. Do the 80-20 rule, right? For most companies, 80% of your revenue is going to be generated by the top 20% of your customers. In that scenario, pick that top 20%. Right? And just kind of go in there and say, hey, let's look at our third-party risk management questionnaires. Let's look at the controls that these organizations are asking us to have, right? That we've mandated. We didn't buy privileged identity management because we were bored or because we decided to one day because we were like, well, we could buy something. Why not spend on this? We bought it because we needed it, because it's a strong security option and because our customers were asking for it. And then you sit down and you look at, hey, what are you spending for that control? Is it 200 grand, 300 grand, whatever it is? Well, how much revenue are those customers generating? Is it 100 million? Is it 50 million? Is it 200? Whatever it is. And you basically say, look, this is pennies on the dollar to keep these customers. These are requirements that they're issuing to us. And this is now the cost of goods sold. This isn't security as a cost center. This isn't security being bored. This is literally, we are spending a few $100,000 a year because it gives us access to millions of dollars per year, if not more. And when you do some of the math on this, looking at various organizations we've worked with, we're often talking about 1 cent on the dollar, 7 cents on the dollar. And sure, there are hyper margin compressed industries where even that can be really impactful. That's absolutely true. But for most organizations out there, when we start saying, look, this is maybe half a cent on the dollar as a cost of goods sold for this security control. This isn't about security's budget. This is about the budget that we have that allows us to meet our customer requirements and obligations. It's just a different sort of conversation. This is why I say things like threat, things like risk quantification. You don't even need to have those conversations. Why are you talking about something that might happen when you could be having a conversation about something that is happening? And what's happening is that you are getting money from organizations that are asking you about your security posture, about your security controls. And so you don't need to go and say there's a 30% annualized loss expectancy. It's, hey, we make a few million off of this customer. They want us to have this thing that costs $200,000. I'm going to present that to you, and I think I should get that budget. By the way, chief revenue officer, head of customer success, head of account retention, whatever the title is, don't you want us to answer this affirmatively that we do have all the controls they're looking for? If I don't have this budget, I can't do that, and that could impact your deals in the pipeline. That's how I've seen it done effectively. So you start kind of small. You look at 20% of your customers, not the full slate. You look at the controls that are common across each one of those customer environments. You look at how much you spend on those. By the way, if you're spending more on those controls than you make from those customers, you do really have a problem, and you do need to cut your budget. And everybody would say that, right? That you do the same thing in your home budget. If you're spending more than you're making, that's a problem. So now with your budget, you're looking at it, and when you start to see how the math breaks out, it's a simple way to go in and start arguing something concrete. This is how much money we make. This is how much we spend. This is our actual return on that investment. And it's a real return on investment.
Yeah, one thing I really liked with the opening section of this report was discussing that here are items we recommend you do in the next 90 days, meaning here, these are things that we can focus on. Now, what we just discussed with the customer-facing expenses, going through and really calibrating to what makes the most sense here, especially because for any CISOs that give way on budget right now, how long does it take for them to gain that budget back?
Yeah, that's my favorite part of this, right? I think every leader knows that once you give ground on budget, if you get it back, that's a huge if you get it back, it's 5 years, 3 to 5 years before you can claw back to where you were. So it really is one of those situations that you just can't fail.
So instead of, go ahead, Jason.
No, because this has a lot to do with the budget side of the aisle, right? When a security organization is seen as a cost center, a lot of times you'll see stroke of the pen cuts. I want you to cut 10%. I want you to cut 15%. Whatever that number may be that the board or the CEO or the CFO come out and say, we're just going to do a swipe. For me, it's about positioning the security team as an essential business unit, right? And doing the things like you were talking about matter, right? So, but metrics matter. So when you sit back and you take a look at, all right, I want to define how we're having an impact on business goals, whether it be revenue goals, whether it be customer retention goals, whether it be operational efficiency goals. If I can make a recommendation to any CISO or security leader listening, you have to have the metrics and the data to support it. Otherwise, you're going to be part of the stroke of a pen cut. So for example, as a CISO for an organization that was an IT services organization, $600 million company, 6,000 clients, 35 of the Fortune 100 that we serviced, I actually had our IT team add a field in Salesforce that we could tag every time the security team influenced an opportunity. So on a quarterly basis, we could show how much revenue we influenced, and we would bring that back to the CFO and the CRO. That in turn allowed us to align security controls investments by the company. And we could say, do we want to sacrifice, the $14 million we drove last month, right, in sales and opportunity, closed opportunity, right? Do we want to sacrifice that, or do we want to invest? You have to have the metrics. If it's vague, if it's gray, you'll be part of the stroke of the pen. So I don't know how important metrics are in actually tagging things like revenue generation or alignment, KPIs that align to the company's goals. But leaders, you have to sit down, you have to understand the company's strategic goals, and you have to align what you're doing to those goals so you can show how you move the needle.
So stepping away, if we're not having to worry about defending a budget outside of the security department, and we look at items for helping CISOs maximize the budget they currently have, there were a few key points that your team brought up. And I want to make sure our audience hears this, because I find it intriguing. And I'm curious, with Summer or Jason, are you actively utilizing flex spending with any of the vendors? Has this become, how aware are companies about being able to do this?
So here's the challenge, and this is something that I wanted to ask Jeff on how other leaders may do this. In many instances, because of economies of scale, you sign up for a 3-year contract. How do you get flex spending in the middle of a contract term? Renegotiation, sometimes you don't get the bigger discounts. So how have leaders been successful in saying, I'm 1 year into a 3-year contract, I want to try this flex spend model. How can I renegotiate and not get hit for it?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. In fact, so one of the rules myself and the co-authors had for this report, because you'll often see it out there whenever we're talking about these kind of challenges, like renegotiate your contract. And I'm like, cool, no one's going to let you do that.
Right.
That's not how it works. You signed a 3-year contract. Unless you've got 1 year outs every year, you're not renegotiating that. But here's where timing can be to your advantage. So these credit-based licensings, flex kind of spending programs out there from vendors, they are relatively new, which means those vendors that launched those initiatives, they need and want adoption, because they want to be able to stand up at the investor conference when they're doing their 10Q or whatever it is in their shareholder meeting, in their earnings call, and say, we rolled out this brand new thing, and as a result, it's led to X amount of brand new revenue growth. We've penetrated customers by Y amount, whatever it might be. So it's got to be a little fortuitous in terms of timing, but that's one of the ways that we've seen it be successful is, hey, you've got this new licensing vehicle out there. I'm intrigued by it. We're in a 3-year contract. Hey, sales team from the vendor that's working with me, I want to take advantage of that, but that means we've got to migrate this deal over. Now, there's a very good chance if this is brand new, those refs are being spiffed on the vendor side. They have an incentive to get someone to roll over to that. So you might be able to use that. The sales rep, meaning that your incentives are aligned with the sales team from the vendor. And again, the folks that launch that on the product side, on the finance side, they want to show some adoption. So that vendor is probably going to be more willing when that thing first launches to get some folks on board with it, versus if it's been around for 5 years and you didn't opt in for it, well, may not be able to do much. But if it's brand new from your vendor and they're advertising it, or it's an early release, or it's a public access preview before it goes live, you get a chance to be a beta customer, that's the best time to do it. So you may not be able to get out of something you're in now, but if a vendor's launched this, there's a lot of incentives in your favor that may allow you to take advantage of it. And the key there is that you're able to swap in and out of products and services as needed. You let the vendor worry about the accounting side on the back end. I think the harder thing to do with this sometimes is getting it by procurement, because the procurement team internally doesn't always understand it. And so they're kind of like, well, wait a second, what are you buying? And it's like, well, we're buying a lot of things, but we're really committing to a minimum spend. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. And so then you've got to sort of sell them internally on it. And that's where hopefully your vendor can help you too, because they need to have language explaining exactly what you're committing to. So we do find that the vendors aren't always the ones to push back on it. It's actually explaining it to procurement that you're kind of shifting to a subscription consumption model, but it's not like other subscription consumption models because of the swap outs inherent to it.
And Jeff, I would also add in there, make sure that you're tightly aligned with your procurement team too. Because if you're a large organization, sometimes here's what happens. Hey, CISO, you have a vendor renewing next week. Yep. Good or bad? Ready? Can we go? Yep. Can we renew it or not? You can't renegotiate in a week. So CISOs, know your vendors, know your contract dates, know when they roll, and be nice and tight with procurement. Otherwise, you're going to get the 5-day countdown on an approval.
And part of that, Jason, that's a good relationship when you have that with your procurement team to set up and have a monthly review with them that says, all right, let's do a 90-day look ahead. What's coming up for renewal? What are we looking for? And I would also say if you could get procurement having like a quarterly business review or whatever cadence that is with your most critical vendors, if you think you're going to talk about any of this flex opportunity, maybe invite procurement with you, your trusted partner in procurement, so they can ask the questions and get comfortable with it as well. That I think would be really invaluable because they're hearing it from the vendor and not just hearing what they might think is a crazy idea from you.
In summer, that just,
I think that's a great point.
It supports the fact that we want to have a seat at the table, right? Because what we're doing is we're showing fiduciary responsibility to the organization of renegotiating contracts, realizing economies of scale, bringing in savings, consolidating in some instances, right? And bringing savings to the organization. Showing that we have financial acumen gets us a seat at the table.
Well, and I'm thinking that with having a greater conversation with procurement also brings up this other point on automating what you can now so you're equipped to do more with less. And one of the points was, and I'm actually really happy about this because we hear so much about AI adoption and we hear about all of the negatives, but you're saying no, because things are being introduced right now, this is a perfect time to negotiate to get more because there's not testimonials. We don't have the proven information yet from vendors and suppliers. So use this to your advantage and negotiate. And I feel like that's another point, like Summer, if you were doing that with the procurement team and then they see how you're leveraging, well, there's AI here, we can do the automation, but then that procurement team can see that across other parts of the organization, right? I mean, Jeff, can you speak more on that, please?
Yeah, I think there's two reasons to automate now, maybe three, with the first one being, hey, we should have done this a long time ago. Automation's been around for a while, right? SOAR is sort of new to security, not that new, but kind of. But developers had middleware about 30 years ago, so they're not too astonished by this concept of automation. But the real non sort of snarky reasons to automate are twofold. One, we are being asked to do more with less, and to Jason's point about fiduciary responsibility and fiscal responsibility, if you're able to show that your automation gains are already affecting the way that you're thinking about headcount, thinking about staffing, thinking about skills, then you're demonstrating that, right? You're not a situation where those executives in finance or FP&A folks are saying, look, the CISO solves every problem with people. And so we've got to train them that they need to do more. But the other reason why, frankly, automating is so important is that one of the things that we're consistently seeing in our research is that the extent to which you have automated processes and integrated technologies in your environment is an excellent proxy for how prepared you are for AI, whether it's agentic, whether it's AI agents, whether it's just AI in general. Because if your technology doesn't talk to each other, AI can't work. If your processes aren't mature, if you don't have strong situational awareness, you're certainly not going to turn loose a bunch of AI agents to fix everything, right? That's the sort of vendor myth, but it's not in reality for the program. So I think those two reasons are really the primary factors to do a lot of automation right now. One, because it does allow you to be prepared. Hey, if you lose some people, not even saying that you're forced to do that cut, like Jason mentioned, but you just have some people that go and you don't get the backfill for them because the company wants to be a little more conservative. Okay, if you've automated more, there's less of a need to fill those spots, even though you want to. And then secondarily to that, it's the AI thing. It's like you can sort of look at what's your horizon and say, okay, we've done a lot with automation. So I feel like when AI agents are ready, when more AI is ready, our environment is also prepared for it.
And another thing as part of this is, we often hear in our field that folks, they worry about career growth and trajectory, right? Like, where am I going to go? What's next for me? If you can work, and you talk about this in the paper, in terms of managing the volatility internally with your team. So you can use this as an opportunity to say, let's work on our automation, let's work on our orchestration, which can lead to AI. And so you're giving the folks on your team that growth opportunity, without putting in the fear of, AI is going to take my job.
And it's an important thing too, Summer, because one of the things that we do find, whether it's AI, whether it's automation, is that whenever you start to do something with AI, with automation, it's harder than the way that you've done it before. That's just true. And you have to accept that friction in order to eventually adopt it successfully and start using it in your mainstream workflow. It doesn't just make things easier right away. We've seen some of the things around AI agents and AI capabilities in the SOC, for example, take 40 to 50 hours for a SOC analyst, a highly technical, experienced, highly capable professional, to start to migrate their workflow to be more AI centric. And it's not because they don't have the skill set for it, it's because they know how to do what they're doing. And starting to do that differently, there's a cognitive burden, there's a timing burden, you've got more alerts piling up and you're like, well, I know how to do it that other way. Why am I spending time like this? Why am I trying to automate something and learn those skills when I could just do it the way I've always done it? Well, the answer is because you're getting better. You're developing additional skill sets you didn't have. That's why it's taking you more time, because it's hard. You don't know how to do it. That's what makes it worth doing. And so I think that's an important part of this. And the same thing is true with prompting. The same thing is true when working with AI that way. You've got to hone that because it's a different skill set.
Right. And I want to mention here to our audience too, because with this report, there is a lot of reference to being able to handle enterprise risk management better. And though we're not going to discuss it in this interview, I do want to make sure that our audience goes to our recent interview with your co-author, Ala, on the 4E's framework so that they can go ahead and discuss that. But very quickly in reference, I appreciated something you had said to me last week, and that, well, a couple of things. One about you recommend possibly moving only second tier data to the SIM. And then also that, actually, I want to start with that. Because you're talking about the data pipeline management and XDR versus SIM. Like, please jump in right there.
Yeah, so I liken most data collection strategies in cybersecurity to just sort of binging episodes of Hoarders over and over and just not letting up. That's what we've done, right? We have this mythology in security that more data is better, and we have to have all the data because you just never know when you might need to use it, right? And so it's sort of a toxic trait that we have, that we feel that way, that we so desperately cling to it. But what we really know, when you kind of boil it down, we do know that there's certain data that's highly important from a compliance perspective. And to the point earlier about building those relationships internally, a lot of those conversations about what does audit need, what does compliance need from a data perspective, what you may find out is that you're collecting a lot of that, putting it in the same place as everything else. And it turns out they're okay with that being in a secured, not unsecured, S3 bucket that they could just go in because you're at least retaining the data. That's something that it's worth working with them on. But when you break out the sort of hierarchy, what we find is that there is data that based on your internal team's capabilities, your rule sets, what you have configured, that you can use for immediate needs like detection. For example, that's the highest priority data that we have. If it can detect an alert, I've got a SOC background, so I'm sort of biased, but that's, to me, that's the highest priority data. And what I think about with that is, what are the detection surfaces that are going to initiate a workflow? In other words, what's going to trigger a detection that I need to go and investigate? or respond to. And so that's that first tier data. I want that. I want it immediately. I want it as accessible and available as possible. I want it searchable. I want it filterable. All of those things are true. Then there's that second tier of data that augments a workflow. And that's the kind of data that I think about that's useful to confirm that event. So often things like NetFlow data, really, really useful in a triage situation. So you've got an alert, maybe it's coming from an EDR tool or something like that. Maybe it's an identity alert. You then go and look at network data to make sure that that endpoint telemetry, for example, is telling you the truth. That what the network sees is very much what the endpoint sees, because we know if an endpoint is compromised, it's no longer a trusted endpoint. The data could also be tampered with. So we want that to validate, oh, this is actually critical. We saw it move to other systems. But there's a whole host of data that's never going to be useful in an investigation, that's never going to be useful during a detection, that isn't useful in the response process, that we're probably only collecting because we were always taught to. So let's offload that completely. I don't need it immediately. I don't need to search it. I don't need to threat hunt on it. So let's move that away. And that's where things like security data pipeline management tools are starting to really show up and offer a lot of capability here, because as we collected more and more data, we made some companies pretty huge that charged us based on the amount of data that we collected, and that tax needs to end. And we now have the capabilities to do it and use that money in much better ways. And so that's really the goal, is to think about your data in a hierarchical structure like that, and then route it accordingly based on the use case and the need, and escape from the hoarding mentality that we've all had about data for so long.
I love that part of the report, in all honesty, because I'm seeing so many clients now say my cloud bills have grown exponentially. And the majority of it is their data storage, right? And what they're trying to do now is look at going back to a more hybrid approach. They're looking at things like Azure Local. They're looking at some local storage to augment it, right? And saying, wow, maybe a full-blown cloud strategy is not the way to go from a cost perspective. Again, we're trying to do more with less. Our budgets are getting tight. We need to realize economies of scale. So by going in, knowing what data they have, classifying the data and where they need to store it, and then appropriately storing it in the right locations, right, based on cost savings, folks are starting to move to that, right? They're not going full-blown cloud now. They're actually coming back on-prem and doing a little bit more of a hybrid approach for the cost savings. So I love this section. You know, CISOs out there, do the diligence, right? It's one of the things that we talk about, Summer. Say easy, do hard. Right? Yeah. You have to know your data. You have to classify your data. And then you have to do the right things from a retention policy and a storage side of the aisle. It's easy to say. It's hard to do, but you have to do it.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
and
Jeff,
I think luckily we've got a technology architecture as well, from federated search and federated query, that's allowing us to do that, right? We didn't have those capabilities before, but now we do.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeff. And I want to make sure all of our awesome audience members are aware that if they're Forrester clients, they can reach out for a guidance session. And I know you said you're available by LinkedIn DMs, you're on Blue Sky, you're on X. So Jeff Pollard is happy to discuss volatility and some of the takes on really flexibility, budget, going around process, and making sure to also center on people. Summer, Jason, thank you for joining us as well this time. And for everybody else, stay tuned. We will have 2 pre-recorded interviews from RSAC to give you even more BSW information right now. Thank you all for joining.
Welcome back to RSAC Conference 2025. We're here in the Sabre Risk TV studio and broadcast alley at Moscone West, not east, north, or south. I don't think there is an. Is there an east? I don't know. I'm your host, Doug White. Joining me for this interview is Pej Roshan, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Menlo Security. Hi.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
It's great. Yeah, thanks for coming down here. That's really fun. We love having great guests on here. And I was reading all your stuff, and I thought, wow, this is a good conversation, because I have these conversations with my clients all the time. And one of the first things that you had on your sheet was talking about neural nets, which I was immediately like, well, I like that. I mean, I love neural nets. I mean, a lot. Like, probably too much. like there was this whole restraining order thing, but we got over that. And you were also talking about phishing and ransomware, and I'm just like the scamaholic. So this is stuff I talk about on my shows all the time. And then, because I do the news, and I talk about this stuff every week. I mean, so much, it's almost gotten numb. You know, it was like, it was like breaches. You know, originally when I was doing the news, we were like, there was a breach this week. Now it's like, yeah, there was 8,472. And then we just got like, okay, yeah, just assume there were breaches.
Yes, for sure.
And so now we're back to this. So, I mean, you guys are working on neural nets to prevent ransomware and phishing.
That is one of the core areas of our offerings. Yeah, is using not machine learning, but neural networking, the AI, the true AI aspect, to learn, understand, and be able to quickly interpret in real time what's legitimate, what's not, what's high risk for enterprises as they operate.
And so, I mean, I had this philosophy forever that humans are always going to fall for scams. I mean, they always have. I mean, since the dawn of time. I was standing on this pier one time in Haifa in Israel, and there were people trying to sell me fake jewelry and stuff. And I was thinking, you know, these guys conned like Egyptian sailors thousands of years ago, and people are still falling for this today. And phishing doesn't seem to be abating; it's getting worse. AI is making it possible for. I was just in the last session talking about deep fakes and creating phishing on the fly. That's, you know, almost interactive phishing that really sounds appealing. And so, how do we? You're trying to take the human element out?
I think it's fair to say, to your point, that we should continue to educate folks to try to discern what's real and what's not real, what looks suspect, and so on. But people are going to click. That's just a given. They are going to be the weakest link in the chain. And so it's important to have a good preemptive and proactive solutions for phishing, ransomware, and malware. And where the use of AI comes into play is, look, to your point, I think the notion of post-breach detect and respond is proven to have failed. So you just said, you know, we used to talk about the breach of the week. Now it's how many thousands of breaches have occurred. I read, I believe it was either Gartner or Forrester is saying that in 2024 alone, phishing attacks increased 200%. That's triple what happened in 2023. And 80% of those are 0-hour attacks. So there's no signature in any database that you can use to reference off of for the detection. So there has to be something preventative. There has to be something proactive that's stopping it before you let the burglar get into your house. And that's where AI comes into play. We're rabid believers that well-trained AI can detect a suspected phishing, ransomware, or malware attack before the user's able to interact with it. And that's I think where the real value lies.
Yeah. So let's just say there's like a phishing email is coming in. I can only filter that on a without what you're talking about. I can only filter that on a signature right now. So unless a known phishing letter from a known IP from whatever, I can filter that on a hash or what have you. So as that has changed, I can generate a completely unique document from the bit level up for every single phishing email I want to send with AI. So I can just use whatever. So how do you stop that? I mean, what are you looking at with your neural net that reduces that attack surface?
Again, to keep this, we're painting with broad brushes here to keep it simple.
No, it's fine, absolutely.
There's three core elements to what we'll do. One is we have a novel approach to the use of AI, which is computer vision, right? That's a very common use for AI detection.
Absolutely.
We will correlate between the logo that's on the page that's popping up, and probably comes as no surprise to you that the number one phished site is Microsoft 365.
Okay, that makes sense.
So correlating the logo to the URL to the mechanics, the content of what's on the page itself. So Menlo Security as a browser security company is looking at the rendered page, you know, in line, and determining what are the components that are running on the page. So correlating between the components. And again, broad brushes here, but do I see the right kind of login prompts that are there combined with the URL, combined with that logo? And, you know, certainly we would do that against well-known logos, but we can also do it against, let's say, your company, right? If your own company's login page, to make sure that that is, in fact, an authentic page. And because this is being done in line, in the data path, that detection happens in milliseconds. So as the page renders and appears on the user screen, we can block that before they have, or put it in read only before they have a chance to actually.
That's more sophisticated than I was thinking about. I mean, well, no, it is, because I was thinking, it was my fault. I was thinking more statically, and I really need to be thinking more dynamically, because I think these things could literally get to the point where they're rendering on the fly based on, I don't know, stuff they can siphon out of your browser, and they could render it up just like that.
Absolutely. I mean, the challenge with, if you think about classic security, you've got network security, you have endpoint security, you have the variations of data security and cloud security. Each of them is kind of running in its own, for lack of a better term, a silo. And network security is looking at what's on the wire. Endpoint security is looking at what's interacting with, for lack of a better term, your laptop and OS. But the browser is a very unique and distinct endpoint.
It is.
And if you think about the world that we live in today, what I like to think of as the modern workspace, it's not like 5 years ago where the office was where we went to work and the office had our server room or data center, and all of those classic infrastructure and endpoint security components were designed to secure what was happening in the office. That's not the world we live in anymore. The office is, let's call it 1/3 of where we work. At home is the other third, and on the road is the other third. And there has to be equivalent fidelity for each of those areas. And applications are now, the preponderance are cloud delivered. I think that's fair to say.
Yep.
And by virtue of that are accessed via the browser. And so the browser is now a legitimate endpoint that has unique security requirements that have to be addressed. So the raw source code that's coming across the wire, network security won't detect what that source code is going to do once it's activated and rendered by the browser. So having a browser security solution that is actively rendering that code on the fly and determining whether there's active content that is suspicious and yanking it out before it renders on the end user's browser is key. Because again, users are going to click. They're going to succumb, and so you want to take that off the table.
Yeah, I mean, basically, so that becomes behavioral, and so that's learning from that behavior too. So it's a constantly evolving threat analytics engine.
Yes,
which I like to hear, because I tend to be old-fashioned and think about static, and I go, oh yeah, I can block that IP. 'Cause I was a network person, and that's not going to help now. I mean, the IP is going to shift every 2 seconds, and it's crazy. Yeah,
one of the biggest misconceptions that we fight against is, enterprises will tell us, oh, I have a SWG. A SWG is covering my web security, right? Secure Web Gateway. The name says it all. When in fact, the majority of attacks that are being mounted today are using legacy URL reputation. So attackers are smart. They're birthing and hibernating thousands of valid sites, letting them get categorized. So they'll just blow right by a secure web gateway and render it completely ineffective for all practical purposes. That's why we have those 8,000 breaches a week that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because I mean, for years we built like Dan's Guardian boxes and stuff, which were very static. I mean, and even they had a dynamic threat intel model where it's like updated daily or whatever, but I just don't think that stuff keeps up anymore, and that non-intelligent kind of model is going to work. I mean, they're just like structured programming, problem solving, like if this, then that.
Right.
But we need to be more proactive than that. And like you said, the users are going to click, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, we used to joke, I started my career in networking, and we used to joke that some of these were layer 8 problems, thinking of the OSI model. They are, in fact, the threats are moving higher and higher. Mm-hmm. Up the stack. So it is imperative to be able to secure the browser, secure the web, because that is, again, where the preponderance of business is happening. And it's not even limited to web. I mean, if you think about all of our jobs, you here, running this show, me and my job in marketing and product, the one manifest that is true is that our job revolves around data, whether it's creating content, whether it's consuming content, whether it's interacting with data on a day-to-day basis. We are judged and assessed in our success and failure of our individual contributions and the contributions of our company are based off of this data, and ensuring that that data is secured, that data is secure from any infection coming inbound, but also from exfiltration or leakage outbound. That's the second facet. And if you think about it, what's the most likely way for data to leak out these days?
Browser.
It's going to be through your browser.
Yeah.
So again, having a solid understanding of what's valid, what's allowed, without, here's my gripe, if I may.
Okay. No, you may.
If I may, about the world of cyber, is that it is so fixated on the security aspect, it loses all sight of the usability aspect.
Well, yeah.
Is fair, right? Like, I want to make sure nothing's leaking out, but I'm going to handcuff the people that actually need to get work done.
And that hurts you bad.
That hurt in a significant way, right? Like, how many times have you pulled your hair out trying to do something because you've been blocked?
More than a few.
So making sure that you're able to actually get work done, but do so in a way that's allows you to not be frustrated, to be productive.
Yeah.
And that applies to administrators as well, security administrators. So making sure that I don't have to create unbelievably static policies that take months, if not years, to roll out, only to be revised again.
Well, I mean, just an example of that. In the early days of the internet, so it was like, I don't know, maybe 2000 or something. I was working for a company, and there was a lot of debate back then about, should we allow this at all? I mean, listen, it happened. But there were literally, CEOs, people saying, look, we don't think our company should be connected to this interweb thing. It's just not a good idea.
Right.
And some said, we're going to test it. And so I built this thing for this one company. And if you went to a website, any website at all, it immediately pops up a screen and it says, you just tried to go to whatever. Please enter an explanation for why you were going to this website and explain to us why this is needed for the performance of your job.
A little draconian.
It was my perfect world. Like the iron fist and the iron glove smashing down in broken glass. It was awesome. But it wasn't well received by the employees. But we got some awesome explanations from people going, I need to go to ESPN to check the mood of my sales clients before I call them. I'm like, right, okay, sure, no. But I mean, this was immediately turned into limiting their job. Now, at the time, it didn't very much, but very quickly it did, right? So this is what you're talking about. And you were calling this browser first. Was this the term that you were using?
Yeah.
It was browser first. And it's become so important that I don't even think we could begin to do that kind of crap now without just creating a really harsh situation.
There are enterprises that still block a large percentage
Oh,
of internet access for that very purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the risk is just perceived to be too high. And I think the reality is, if you rely on, again, those old silos of network security and endpoint security and data security, that is the world that you'll be living in. So if you recognize that the modern workspace is a cloud-first, browser-first world, that AI is a fixture that you have to adapt to and not fight. And again, I've talked to CISO after CISO here at this event that we still block access to ChatGPT or Copilot or what have you. Yeah. There's hundreds and hundreds of sites, and AI appears in the most innocuous places, right?
Oh, it's everywhere.
Everywhere.
I mean, you don't want it. It's just like,
And agentic is around the corner, and it's going to be not a linear progression, but a multiplicative progression, right? Something logarithmic, and the complexity it's going to add for data leakage. So it's time to start thinking about AI-powered policy creation, ways that allow you to be scalable and making sure that I can secure data from leaking out, but also ensure that users are able to access the tools that they need. I can tell you that my board looks to me and asks me the degree to which I'm using AI tools as a tool for cost savings, to get leverage, to increase what I can output without needing to add additional resource. And you have that on one shoulder and the don't let data leak out. I have people that are taking product content and putting it on ChatGPT to punch it up, and we have to balance the two, and having common sense policies, both written policy as well as the way our data protection policies in place
I concur.
Makes a ton of sense.
Well, thank you, Pej Rashnan, for joining us today. If you want to find out more, please visit all our RSAC 2025 coverage, but you can go to www.menlosecurity.com or securityweekly.com/menlosecurityRSAC. Find out more. Thanks for tuning into this. We'll be back with more interviews all day. Thanks, Pej.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Welcome to RSAC Conference 2025. We're here recording live from the CyberRisk TV studio and Broadcast Alley at Moscone West. I'm your host, Mandy Logan, and joining me for this interview is Deepan Desai, CSO and Head of Security Research at Zscaler. Welcome, Deepan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I am so glad. I'm always happy when I get to see you and hear, because research is fascinating to me. That is more of my home or my milieu. So I am thrilled to see actually this very interesting phishing report that you just released. I believe you were one of the authors on it as well.
Yeah, it's my team that did a lot of work, but I was very close to it, yes.
Okay, so speaking about the phishing side, I want to go back a few steps because we know at the conference and as all of industry is adjusting to AI-assisted defenses or actually having to try to secure the AI agents and even LLMs that they are using consistently, I want to know from the top right now, what is something that you are most encouraged by that Zscaler is doing in helping the clients cope with the AI-assisted attacks?
Great question. So, look, when it comes to AI, there are two aspects that we help out with. Every organizations globally are on AI adoption journey to become more efficient, improve efficacy across different areas. Over there, Zscaler will help ensure that we securely enable organizations to adopt those AI applications. So you're able to apply data loss prevention, you're able to apply TLS inspection, you're able to make sure nothing good leaks out that you don't want to leak out. And then also you're able to identify those shadow AI applications that you have not sanctioned to be leveraged in the environment. The second aspect is where the bad guys are also leveraging AI to target organizations, right? And that's where my guidance to my peers has always been, you need to lean in on a platform. Zscaler is one of them where we will leverage AI to fight AI, but there is no AI solution right now that is perfect. The keyword that I mentioned is leverage, right? It's not going to replace humans. It's going to allow you to do things with high efficacy, high efficiency, but it's part of the solution. So the second piece, which is even more important to do right now, as we wait for the AI-based defense to evolve, organizations must reduce complexity, simplify their network. And this is where the zero trust everywhere strategy becomes very important. Because if you do implement zero trust, you're shutting down vectors for AI-driven attacks, for any kind of threat actors.
If I remember correctly, Zscaler is able to integrate very easily with several identity management platforms.
Yes.
Now, with the rise of AI-assisted phishing attacks becoming increasingly targeted, first, can you mention some information from your reports on findings regarding that, but then also give our audience more information on how and why identity management and Zscaler are more effective for their end goal?
Great question. So one of the key findings that we saw in the phishing report this time is the volume of attacks went down. Globally, I believe that was 20% lower year over year. We see a clear shift from volumetric attack to high quality attacks. This is where the threat actors are leveraging AI to craft very targeted emails. They're trying to bring in context of what's going on at that time for that organization before they come up with that phishing template.
Right.
They will use regional language, local information when they target certain regions of that company. So clear shift from volumetric to quality. We also are seeing hybrid approaches where, traditional way of performing phishing attacks is sending a link, and then the guidance we always give is don't click on that link.
Right.
But now you may get a phone call, you may get a voice message on your WhatsApp, right? And that is followed by traditional way of doing phishing, but they establish that trust by making that phone call that, oh, okay, this is this person, and then the chance of employee falling for those type of attacks go up. So we're seeing many of those hybrid attacks increasing as well. So these are some of the findings that we highlighted in the report as well. And then, look, the things like adversary in the middle attacks, where they're able to evade some of the weaker forms of MFA, it still is happening. So FIDO2 compliant MFA is the push that I have always been
Absolutely.
asking
Yes.
all the peers to do. Yeah.
Oh, I fully agree on that. And going back, you were talking about email security protocols, and from your report, I was encouraged by the fact that you showed DMARC as one of the protocols that had helped reduce phishing by, I think it was 31.8%.
Yeah, one of the major changes that we saw, and this is, again, we're not able to accurately attribute this was the reason, but it makes sense. So, for instance, Google Gmail, it stopped the feature that allows you to do bulk send,
Yes.
where you're able to send to 100 plus 1,000 destination addresses. So that bulk send feature was stopped. So it basically resulted in reduction in spam messages being sent out. And Google themselves also pointed out some of the numbers because of this, what the impact was. That is one of the reasons, and like you said, the more secure protocol adoption is another reason where we believe. But I would also like to point out that generative AI usage by these bad guys is definitely another reason where why do volumetric attacks when the chance of people clicking through is significantly reduced when you're not using that context? The chance
Right.
of them clicking goes up significantly when you use it.
Oh, yes, with the hyper targeted attacks. And like you mentioned, what I took part from your report was that phishing was kind of the number one thing that you were calling out for teams to really zero in on, to really focus in on. And it seems to me, looking at surveying what products are out there, in fact, yesterday I was doing more research on one that was about being able to detect deep fakes more quickly. First, have you seen many effective adoptions of anything across industry that is helping with deep fakes? Or is this also what sandboxing within Zscaler helps handle?
So sandboxing is different, and I'll walk you through that as well. But so deepfake detection, there are many startups in that space. I'm not sure if we are there yet, where every single, because just like you're using AI to generate those deepfake content, you're using AI to detect that, and then you're using AI to evade that detection, and then you're using AI to again. So that cat and mouse game will keep going on. Now, phishing is just a starting point.
Right.
They could use phishing, they could then send you a link, they manage to make the employee click on that link. The next stage often involves compromise of an identity or compromise of an asset by deploying a malware payload, which is, again, it could be very customized for the destination company that they're targeting. So this is where a sandboxing technology comes in, because sandbox is where you are able to detonate the payload in a controlled environment. You observe all the activity that the payload will perform, and based on that, you're able to convict whether it's a malware or a clean file.
Right.
And what has traditionally happened is sandboxing technology is old. People would use it as a point product, which means they will allow the user to download the file, and sandboxing happens in parallel. And then 5, 7, 10 minutes later, sandbox will say, oh, this file was bad. And then they have to go back and clean up that patient zero.
Right.
And the speed at which the attacks are evolving, it may already be late by then. So the way we do it is we're able to hold that file, we are able to prevent that patient zero infection from happening while that sandboxing is in progress. We may even use technology
And
like...
for the end user, what do they see? What is experienced at that moment?
Great question. So it could be one of the two. Some of the organization will use browser isolation. So they will serve stream of pixels. So the user is able to see the content, but no active content gets downloaded on the endpoint until the sandboxing is complete. Or it could be an end user notification page that says, hey, the file that you were trying to download was deemed suspicious. It's going through sandboxing. As soon as its analysis is complete, the download will resume. So it could be either or.
Sorry to cut you off there, but do you have an estimate of time, usually how long that sandboxing process is?
So sandboxing involves running the actual file.
Right.
Now, if the file is seen for the very first time, it can take up to 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay.
If you have seen the file before, once that sandboxing is complete, within 30 seconds, we're able to propagate that information globally. So we will not do that sandboxing again because we know the file is convicted. So in that case, it's split second.
Okay, so and for security teams and end users, during that sandboxing time, they're able to still use every other application process, other browser tabs, anything else that's on their machine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the automatic protocols allow, if it has been found to be benign, it's released,
Yes.
and they continue forward.
Correct.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then that adds to your data on everything that needs to be addressed or allowed across all of your users, right?
Yes, because once we build a reputation for a file, it gets propagated to all global organizations that are going through Zscaler. So to give you some perspective, on any given day, we're seeing about 500 plus million new unique files hitting our sandboxing global clusters.
Well, I do. It was 9 billion that are blocked, threats that are blocked a day, right?
Yes. So sandboxing is payload detonation. The 9 billion piece that you're talking about is threats and policy blocks that we're enforcing on a daily basis, which is, again, a huge number. It could be, yeah.
That is huge when I think of that. And I try to think of like your server setup and everything else that you have going on. And it's incredibly impressive. But please go back to what you were speaking on here for the, was it 500,000? New pieces of material gained each day?
So 500 million
500
plus
million. Yes.
payloads hitting our sandboxes. So we will learn about those payloads and then we'll propagate that intelligence globally. That way we don't have to detonate those files again. Again, going back to phishing, right? Like I said, phishing is a starting point. We have seen them calling your IT help desk. We've seen them calling your employees to gain trust and then make them do certain things to compromise identity, compromise a machine. Then they will plant these malware.
Right.
Then they will try to move around within the environment. What all things are reachable from that first machine, first identity that was compromised. And then the end goal is always to reach crown jewel applications. The applications which are mission critical for that organization, where there is data that could hurt that brand if the bad guys are able to exfiltrate that. So that's the typical playbook that we see. It just starts with phishing.
Excellent. Now I want to go back. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about TLS inspection. Can you give us just a little bit more information on that?
Great question. So look, more than 90% of the traffic that is internet bound is TLS encrypted. TLS encryption provides privacy to the end user when they're browsing internet. So nobody's able to eavesdrop. But then the bad guys are also using that same encrypted channel to serve bad stuff and also to exfiltrate good stuff from these organizations, which is where TLS inspection on many of these URL categories become very important, because otherwise you're not able to detect those phishing pages.
Okay.
Or you're not able to detect the data or even identity being stolen from your environment. So that's where TLS inspection becomes crucial. And we're able to do that at scale without having to worry about compute resources, because again, we have multiple point presence on that aspect.
Wonderful. So in our last few seconds here, what is one key takeaway from the phishing report and from what you're seeing in the field with it, dealing with AI-assisted defenses, or actually, I guess, helping the companies protect their AI assets? What's one main key takeaway for our audience?
Yeah, look, every single CXO must think about having a proper security and governance framework to protect their AI adoption. That's one. I'm going to give you two.
Go for it.
Second one is they must also have a plan to protect against AI-driven threats, because they will see them. We're already starting to see them across the board, whether it's phishing, vishing, malware being delivered, data exfiltration. There will be use of AI by bad guys to perform many of these things. So you need to have an architecture like Zero Trust to make sure you're A, using AI to fight AI, and B, you're reducing those attack paths by implementing Zero Trust.
Oh, excellent. Deepan, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you.
To find out more about Zscaler, please visit securityweekly.com/Zscaler RSAC. For all RSAC 2025 coverage by Cyber Risk Alliance, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC. Thanks again, Deepan, for the conversation.